Hey, Sens fans, welcome to the Senstennial podcast, a member of the Hockey Podcast Network. Subscribe to us for weekly content regarding the Ottawa Senators. This week, we have another member of the Hockey Podcast Network joining us as we welcome to the show one of the hosts of Arizona's Sporty with Cori and Richie podcast, and Richie. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, gentlemen. We're recording on Sunday morning here. Happy to be with you. We've been a little bit of a hiatus from our show over the summer before we get back into actual hockey here, which we're starting to do. So Cori and I will be back here in a couple of weeks, right before the season starts. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm glad we can, it's time to talk hockey again. I feel like it's been forever.
Yeah, the summer felt really long for whatever reason. I mean, especially for us, I think as Sens fans with so many big moves happening, we're really excited to get the season underway. But to start off, like, how long have you been watching the Coyotes, and how did you get into hockey in the desert?
Yeah, I get asked this all the time, and I feel like I'm like the perfect case to ask this because I have a little bit of a different kind of story when it comes to this. So I was born in the early 90s. So at the time here in Arizona, there was no Diamondbacks, no Major League Baseball. The Coyotes were still in Winnipeg at the time. The Cardinals were awful, and the Suns were pretty good. So at the time, I was basically when I was a kid, I was basically a basketball fan. That was it. I wasn't a football fan at the time. Baseball, I wasn't a baseball fan until the Diamondbacks came along. And so my two favorite sports when I was a kid were basketball and baseball. So I was a big Suns and Diamondbacks fan. And hockey was here, obviously, starting in 96 with the Coyotes, but I wasn't really a fan of it. It wasn't my thing. My parents weren't fans of it, et cetera, et cetera. So it just kind of wasn't my thing. Until I went to my first game, I went to my first game in 2009, I believe, 2008 maybe. And the first game I ever went to was the Coyotes, and they were playing the Washington Capitals. So I got to see Alex Ovechkin play, which I thought was really cool. Coyotes ended up winning that game. I think they ended up getting a shutout in that game. And their goaltender, I believe at the time was, I think this was Brizzer. I think Ilya Brizgalov may have been their goalie at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so I went to my first game. I got completely hooked. I actually had pretty good seats. I was like 5 rows off the ice for my first ever NHL game. And then as soon as I went to my first game, I was hooked. And then I've been a fan ever since. And it's been an interesting, decade plus now of Coyotes fandom, to say the least. That's for sure.
Awesome. Well,
are you planning on going to the new arena that they're going to be having?
Yeah, I want to. It's just a matter of trying to find a date, because like obviously my friends want to go too, and I'm not gonna, like, they're expensive, man. Like, granted, they're gonna sell out every single one of those games. Okay, I want to put that out there right now, and I know a lot of people don't understand that, but it will sell out. For most people, yes, it's expensive to go to a game at the new Mull Arena, ASU's new rink. It's expensive for me. It's basically about $150 or so for the most part, getting in price, even for really bad games. And that's 150 American. But yeah, they're gonna sell out every time. Where the rink is located, it's a more kind of rich part of town, I guess, near Arizona State and near the East Valley, which is where more people live, where incomes are higher, et cetera, et cetera. So they'll be able to sell out. They've been selling season tickets really well. And so I'm hoping to go to a game at some point if I can find a cheaper-ish ticket on resale markets. But I can't wait to go to a game there. And maybe it will be this year, maybe it will be next year. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm excited to check out a game at Mullet Arena, which opens up here in a couple of weeks with ASU. I believe they're playing their first game there.
That's really exciting. But I mean, if we are a Senators podcast, and there's obviously a reason that we have somebody of Arizona fan base on. So moving on to the main topic, what's going on with Jakob Chychrun, and why do you think he's requested a trade out of Arizona?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if you guys saw when they opened up a training camp, I guess a week and a half ago or so. and he had his press conference, and you can just watch his body language, listen to the words he said, and you can just tell he just didn't want to be here anymore. even going back to exit day back in April, right? Basically, he was saying the same thing, which is he just didn't want to be here, and it's super unfortunate. And I like Jakob Chychrun. I like him as a player. I like him as a person. I spent some time covering the Coyotes on a regular basis several years ago, and getting to talk to Chychrun on a regular basis was great. He's one of my favorite people to talk to, but for whatever reason, I think he's just kind of sick of everything, and it's unfortunate. And I know some Coyotes fans might be a little ticked off about that, but like I don't blame them. Like, you want to win. You're an athlete. That's what you want to do. You don't want to waste your time on a rebuilding franchise again, right? Like, he's moving into his he's still young. He's still 25 years old. Still got a couple of years left on his contract. Like, these are the years where he's going to prove teams for his next contract so he can make more money, right?
Yeah. And
I don't know if he's going to be able to do that in Arizona. And that's really, really unfortunate because, like I said, I really, really like the player, and I really, really like Chychrun as a person. He was somebody who on our show on Sporty, Cori and I, several years ago, we were championing Jakob Chychrun to be the next captain of this franchise, to be the next face of the franchise. That's how good he was. That's how likable a player he was.
Wow.
And so marketable he was. And now he wants to leave, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's come to a point. I think it's come to a point now where I put this out as a poll on the Sporty account recently, where I asking if Jakob Chychrun has played his last game in Arizona, and I honestly think he may have. That's how bad I think things have gotten between him and the team. Mm-hmm. Whether they want to portray it that way or not, I don't know. But he's still kind of coming off some surgery he had in the offseason. He's been skating, but he hasn't been practicing with the team. It's just one of those things where it seems like it's almost like a little bit kind of like a holdout type of thing, where like the team has told him, listen, we know you don't want to be here. Don't continue to rehab, et cetera, but we don't, we're gonna basically get a trade before the season starts. So that's what I'm thinking right now, is at some point he's going to be traded before the season starts here. In 2 weeks. That's how kind of dire I think it's gotten for Jakob Chychrun here. And in terms of how that's going to affect his price, like it's going to bring his price down because they're so desperate to trade him now. Whereas before, I think maybe they thought they could fix things. They thought that, they could work it through and figure things out. And that's just not the case anymore. And so his value is dropping because if you're the Coyotes, you can't keep him on the roster because you're a rebuilding franchise that is trying to rebuild a culture that is, trying to bring in a lot of young players that with a mix of veterans to kind of keep things gelled together. And you just can't have a player that just doesn't want to be there on your roster like that. It just doesn't work. It never does. And you can say that for any walk of life. If you have somebody who doesn't want to work a job, your workplace becomes toxic. And then that's kind of where it would become, I think, if Jakob Chychrun's a professional, but at the same time, every player on that roster knows he doesn't want to be there. And it's unfortunate. So I have a feeling we're going to see a trade here before the season starts.
Yeah. And I mean, I voted on that poll and I may have voted yes. But no, I mean, Ottawa has seen it like back in 2017, 2018. I'm sure, as you know, Ottawa shipped off Erik Karlsson, Matt Duchene, Mark Stone. And Mark Stone at the time was someone that, just like you're saying with Chychrun, like everyone was like, yo, this guy's the next captain. And they ended up getting, I don't want to say very little, but ultimately a second round pick, a guy on an expiring contract who is a depth player, and Erik Brandstrom, who looked good in the preseason game last night, but so far hasn't met expectations of what Sens fans were hoping for. And they definitely sold low on Mark Stone, but I think it's just because they ran out of time at the trade deadline. They just needed to get something, and they didn't want him to walk in the summer. So similar situations, I think. So I think we can kind of sympathize with you a little in that regard. But, according to Darren Drager, Ottawa is one of those teams who's very interested in trading for Jake Chychrun. And there's other clubs that are interested too. But Ottawa, with his connections to Ottawa, with his family and stuff, a lot of people really want this to happen in the Ottawa market, even though I think the need has been seen as more of wanting a top 4 right-handed defenseman. But, in your opinion, what would be a fair trade? Like, what do you think Ottawa would have to give up for you to be satisfied in a trade for Jake Chychrun?
Yeah, I think this is something that I just kind of alluded to. I think it's changed. I think in the past, it probably would have been like two picks, maybe a first round pick, maybe like a third round pick, and then 2 players. I think that was kind of what we were looking at. But I think that's changed now. And I think the Coyotes right now, and I don't know how Bill Armstrong, he's always kind of said he's going to hold out for exactly what he wants. And he's just not going to get it now, as we were kind of previously just talking about. So I have a feeling it's just going to be kind of a simple package. It's going to be like a first round pick and a fairly top level prospect that is either close to the NHL or already playing in the NHL, one of the two. I think that's it. And if you're a team, I think that's a steal, to be honest. If you're trying to trade for Jakob Chychrun, as far as the player he is, for Senators fans who haven't watched Jakob Chychrun play, and probably not that much other than when he's playing the Senators, the type of player he is, if he's healthy, and I think that's the biggest question for me moving forward with Jakob Chychrun, if you're a fan of a team that's thinking about acquiring him, is when he's healthy, he's elite. He can be a top 15 defenseman in the entire NHL. He proved that. During the COVID season, right? In 2019, 2020, he was one of the best goal scorers in the league. I think he got robbed of a Norris nomination that season. He was that good offensively. Oh, and he was also really good defensively too. He was the guy on the ice that was getting big minutes against big time players. He was the guy that was playing against Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, et cetera, name your elite level talent. Jakob Chychrun was your number 1 defenseman. And I still think he can be that if he's healthy on a team with a good roster. And that's what you're getting. You're getting, I think, a top 4, if not top pairing defenseman at his best on a good roster. Last year, go look at Jakob Chychrun's numbers. He was hurt a lot of the season. He didn't play well, and all of that was, I think, the roster construction. I think his you could tell he was starting to feel that way, that things were just getting stale. Maybe he just didn't quite mesh with Andre Torini too. He has never really talked about that publicly, but I wonder if that's kind of the case, if that became a problem with Chychrun and Andre Torini. But yeah, if he's healthy, and he hasn't been over the last couple seasons, he's always missed games. I don't have his stats in front of me, but he missed dozens of games last season. That's why his numbers weren't good. But if he's healthy on a good roster, he'd be a top 4 defenseman that's playing big minutes for you. He's really good on the power play as well. So I think anybody who trades for him is getting a heck of a player, and it's well worth, when I was just kind of just asking, a first round pick and a decent prospect.
You essentially answered our next question, but I mean, out of the teams that have been reportedly interested, Ottawa being one of them. I know the Maple Leafs, the Blue Jackets, and I think Pittsburgh, maybe. A couple teams have been in the news being interested about it. Have you maybe gone on Cap Friendly and looked at some of their prospects and seen what you might be interested in bringing back?
It's funny. A lot of people will do that. I know a lot of fans, and they'll do like your armchair GM stuff. I tend to try and kind of stay away from that stuff. I tend to be more of do something like this where I'm talking to you guys, and you guys can kind of explain to me what kind of your prospect pool, because I know a lot of people around the NHL like to do this. They like to think that they're experts on every NHL roster and every NHL prospect pool, and I'm not. I will admit to that. I am not. I talk about the Coyotes. I'm really well versed in the Coyotes, but I'm not as much well versed in every other player prospect pool. So I'm just in for the ride, man. We'll see. I don't really have a preferred destination for him. Whoever's willing to give up the most for him, I'll take it. And I was talking to somebody the other day about this too, which is like, wherever he goes, I will root for Jakob Chychrun, and I want him to do well. It was the same with Darcy Kemper, for example, right? The Coyotes traded him to Colorado for a first round pick, which they used this season, and they took Maverick Lemery with that pick. But yeah, I want, like, Darcy Kemper, I wanted him to do well. I was rooting for him to win the Stanley Cup, and I was super, super happy when he got to do that. So if Jakob Chychrun gets to do the same thing, I will be very, very happy wherever he goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you look at the Ottawa prospect pool, there's been a lot of talk about a guy like Shane Pinto being involved, but I think that he's just become untouchable He's had injury issues. He missed all of last season because he got injured in the preseason, but he's now become like a staple on the third line. But one player who I think could be available, who's young player, excellent on the penalty kill. I mean, right now he's unsigned. It's Alex Formenton, very fast player, and I mean he's involved in the Hockey Canada investigation, so I think that is why maybe some teams, potentially Arizona, would be apprehensive around him. But I know a lot of people in this market are saying, if Ottawa packaged up a first round pick, a guy like Alex Formenton, potentially another prospect or pick, and sent salary back because Ottawa's a team that has an internal cap, and they sent a guy like Nikita Zaitsev back who has 2 years at like 4.5 or something like that, 4.8 million. Then that might work, but I guess it just remains to be seen whether Arizona takes the gamble on a guy who potentially could have been involved in something, or what. But I mean, he kind of fills that need for like a young roster player that could just jump into the NHL. And he had 18 goals last year and has more potential, I think.
Yeah, do you guys have any, what is your defensive prospect pool like? Because I was just looking up Alex's information super quick. And he's a winger, which is something that the Coyotes have really been trying to rebuild their forward group more so than their blue line, which is why losing Chychrun kind of sucks in that way. But clear on that, like the Coyotes blue line depth and their organizationally is not that good. They drafted the Swedish defenseman Soderstrom a couple of years ago, and he hasn't quite cracked the NHL on a full-time basis. So like ideally I would like to get a younger defenseman back in a trade. What is your defensive pool like?
I think three names obviously stand out, and one of them is very well could be Eric Brandstrom, especially considering he hasn't really found a place where he fits in the Ottawa lineup. If he continues to have games like he did yesterday, he may not be part of that package. But guys like Lassie Thompson and Jacob Bernard-Docker, first round picks from 2018 and 2019, and they have strengths to their game where Lassie is more of a defensive defenseman, whereas JBD plays a bit of a two-way game. JBD, I would probably say, has the edge on Lassie in terms of organizational depth, but both have their strengths and both have their weaknesses. And I think if we are bringing in a defenseman, we need to get rid of at least one of our rostered defensemen. And if Brandstrom is going, and we did want to get rid of Zaitsev at some point, because that would definitely help with the old tank in Arizona, that both of those guys would be good options, especially when you're bringing back Jakob Chychrun.
Yeah, and I mean, Ottawa right now has a log jam at defense because Bernard-Docker has shown that he can play at a higher than expected level. Lassie Thompson, like Matt was saying, like he seems, even though in junior he was a guy who was very much like big slap shot from the blue line type player, I think at the NHL level his offense might not shine through as much. But they're both right-handed defensemen. Personally, I love Jacob Bernard-Docker, so I would hate to see him go. But Lassie Thompson is still like a solid defensive prospect, and I think he's like 21 right now. Brandstrom is 22, turning 23 this season. They're both young guys. One plays left side, one plays right. But yeah, and I especially think that if Ottawa was sending Nikita Zaitsev to Arizona, then they would attach like another prospect, like one of those guys, just to give Arizona that other piece of the organization if that's what they wanted to take on Zaitsev's contract.
Yeah, to me that sounds perfect. Again, like I think the Coyotes are fairly close to the cap floor. I think they had to actually do some maneuvering with Andrew Ladd's contract to get them there, right? Andrew Ladd is on long-term injured reserve. Essentially, they acquired his contract, and they had to maneuver the way that his designation was from LTIR to just IR, so they could get the cap hit to get to the cap floor, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, I think that so a package just like that would be perfect. If the money works out, that is easily something I would 100% do. And the more organizational depth that Coyotes can get, again, on their blue line would be huge. Like I said, their blue line organizationally isn't that great. Shane Gostisbehere was their best defenseman last season at the NHL level, which is wild to say. I'm sure you guys know Shane Gostisbehere well from the Eastern Conference days, right? And he's probably going to get traded at the trade deadline too, to be honest. I think he's on an expiring contract this year. So, yeah, so any bodies you can send our way, I love it. Even if it's in Nikita Zaitsev, bring it on.
Anything for Connor Bedard.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, I have one last question for you, and then I don't know if Matt has anything else, but mine was because Ottawa really has like a void, I think, in the top four at the right side. Is Jakob Chychrun a guy who could play both sides of the ice, or what do you think is better for his game?
For the most part, he's always played the left side. But I think they played around maybe in a training camp playing him on the right side. I could be wrong about that, but if my recollection is correct, he's played a teensy tiny bit of on the right side. But 99% of the time, he's a left side guy.
Okay.
and that's it for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. I mean, Richie, unless you have any Sens related questions.
I do have one. I'm looking at your background there, and you got a Kyle Turris jersey. Why?
Oh yeah, I
mean,
forgot he's on the Coyotes.
I like Kyle Turris was my favorite player when I was in high school. When we made the trade for him, I thought it was a steal. We traded you guys like a second in David Rundblad, and like Kyle Turris ended up being a top 6 center for us and was clutch. Yeah. Great defensively, and you could always rely on him putting up 50 points. I mean, I know that his Arizona time wasn't great, but I also think it was a case of, rushing a kid who was coming from the BCHL. So I think there was just a disconnect there, and he needed a fresh start. I'm really happy to see he's got a role after his hockey playing career. And yeah, as I said, one of my favorite players, and was a really awesome guy in the community in Ottawa.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad he was able to get back on the right track. But yeah, you nailed it. Like Wayne Gretzky, because that's when Kyle Turris came up in the NHL. That was his head coach, and he ruined guys' careers because they did that with several guys. They did it with Kyle Turris. They did it with Mikhail Bakker. A couple other players too at that time who were younger players just got brought up way too quickly, and it ruined their Coyotes careers, and in some cases their careers in general, because they just weren't able to figure their stuff out. So Kyle Turris here kind of persona non grata in the Arizona community. So I just want to give you crap about that. But I'm glad he's very well liked elsewhere.
Well, Bodker was the guy who, anytime he played the Sens, I swear he got a hat trick on us. He was like, he would just become the Sidney Crosby player whenever he played us. And then Ottawa ended up with him in a trade.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I thought he.
Yeah,
he
and
he was terrible.
Yeah, like there were
glimpses, terrible.
There were like glimpses of like some play where you're like, okay, like, he has flashes of his old skill, but yeah, he never put it together in Ottawa. Yeah, but anyway, thanks for joining us today. Did you want to plug your socials and where to find your show?
Sure. You can follow us on Twitter. It's at Cori_Richie show. My personal Twitter is at rflores91. And yeah, we'll be back here in the next couple of weeks. And I have a feeling, to be honest, I think what we're waiting for is for Jakob Chychrun to be traded. And that's going to be our season premiere episode. Is when Jakob Chychrun gets traded, pop open the laptops, record a 3-hour long episode. There's our season premiere.
That's great. Well, if he's traded,
love to see it.
Yeah, if he's traded to Ottawa, we'll come join you and we'll chat about that for sure. Because that would be a fun time. Well, yeah, for everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. You can find us on social media on Twitter at Senstennial, on Instagram at the Senstennial Podcast. Obviously, we're on YouTube if you're watching it here at Senstennial Podcast, and we're on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Appreciate it. And go Sens go, or in Richie's case, go Coyotes go.